Welcome to Beyond Revenue, Narratives of Revenue Leaders. Today, I had a very interesting guest from the US, Mike Groeneveld, VP Sales of Everstage, has a wide experience from different sales positions, operational director, SVP, VP. We talked about fixing sales forecasting and why quality beats quantity. We covered a lot of different topics, how you can fix your forecast, how you can better work with your teams to focus on getting more quality in. And I think the most interesting part is about the nuances in sales, which he has an interesting approach how to solve it. Dive in, and I'm really looking forward for your feedback. Mike, I'm extremely happy that you join my show. Quick background, I read your posts on LinkedIn. I really loved them. And I reached out and asked, hey, would you be open to join my show to talk a little bit about forecasting? Because one of your big posts was how we fix forecasting with actually quality instead of quantity. And that's going to be the topic of the day. So very happy to have you today here. Your background, I saw you did more or less everything, right? From operational sales to founders to director levels in sales to VP, SVP level. But I guess the introduction you can do on your own a little bit better than I do. So, Mike, who are you and what are you doing?
Yeah. First off, thank you for having me, Michael. So, just by way of introduction, my name is Mike Groeneveld, currently the VP of Global Sales at a company called Everstage. And really, throughout my career, I've always kind of been in sales in some sort of capacity and had, I think, a relatively traditional path. I started as a BDR, and essentially have moved my way up, throughout my career. I think I found kind of a niche helping companies from 0 to 100 million. And I've done that at privately held companies, publicly traded companies. And as far as Everstage is concerned, it's a commission automation platform that's, we've been able to 10x revenue in the last 2 years. We started off as kind of a newer player in the market and have, I think really found our niche now. So, about 300 employee Series B, sort of organization. And I like to categorize that as scale up versus startup. But, however you want to
Sure.
shake it, you can shake it.
Absolutely. Sounds really interesting. And I think the experience you bring to the table will be in a fantastic discussion today. What was the specific moment you realized on your own that quantity will not pay off, but really investing into quality makes the difference? And how was that like?
I would say that moment, so one, when that moment hits, it'll hit you really hard, right? But I'd say that moment came pretty early on in my career. I was, a BDR as I kind of first started. And ultimately, you can make as many calls as you want, but if you're not hitting your number, then it doesn't really matter, right? You're not getting the recognition that you need. You're not making the money that you want, and you're not ultimately going to be able to achieve your goals, right? And so
Hmm.
ultimately, it became really clear that efficiency to output is much better than quantity. So I'd say that is probably where it all kind of started, but it has continued to be reminded as well. I think as I've grown in my career, I've been in organizations where essentially the ACV was pretty much, very consistent. It was pretty much the same. And
Mhm.
from that perspective, it's really easy to get lost in quantity because ultimately all the deals come in at the same price point, right? And so you can hit your numbers by simply just netting out the math, a lot of times,
Yeah.
especially pre AI, pre COVID days, right? But as I've kind of grown in my career where ACVs can fluctuate and you have different, SMB, mid market, enterprise, again, it's not just a numbers game from a quantity perspective. You really got to think about quality. And I remember there was a time in my career where I was moving from an organization that, again, consistent ACVs to where there's a wide ranging of that scale and having deals close that were small and they don't really matter, right? And it's like you want to be
Sure.
excited when a deal closes, but at the end of the day, it's not really moving the needle when it comes to the big number. So there's definitely been reminders along the way, but I think it really started, in my cold calling days.
Fair enough. Yeah, we see that quite often, right? That quantity is goal from top down, more or less, right? Pipeline coverage needs to look good, no matter if you reach your forecast or not. But if the pipeline coverage is good, that's what the C level looks like. The board looks on, and I'm always trying to say, look, quality. I want to trust my numbers, and it will not come from quantity. So let's talk a little bit maybe on the sales forecast. What was the wildest thing you have seen in a sales forecast?
So I've been at organizations where it's like the most cliche sort of scenarios that you've seen, right? Where it's like, hey, I want you to be realistic, but then you're constantly being needled to be like, well, that number's not high enough, right? And it's like, do you want me to be realistic, or do you want me to tell you what you want to hear? And so as a result of that, I've certainly seen, colleagues be pressured into multiple enterprise deals that are, early in the sales cycle, certainly aren't hitting on all of the key measuring points and litmus test points that are needed in order to forecast. And so the
Mm,
wildest one, to put numbers to it, I've seen somebody go over 1 million and not hit their number, right? So they're essentially over 1 million over their commit that they actually delivered. And then to double down on it, did the same thing the next quarter by thinking that those deals just slipped, right? So luckily that wasn't me, but I'm more conservative by nature.
Yeah, the interesting part is, right, when you build it like this, there definitely comes an end of your leadership, right? Because there's one day you didn't hit numbers one quarter too much, yeah.
Yeah.
And if you build it like this, you pull in the deals early. You just look on coverage. You report the nice coverage, and then you never hit the forecast. I just worked as an interim CRO, and when I got oversight, look, pipeline coverage looks amazing. It's all good there. You don't need to cover on it. And I think on the first board meeting, I went in. It's like, look, we're not going to hit numbers the next 2 quarters, and our coverage goes now down on 50%, and that's the reality. Okay, and I think if you build it like this, it's going to be really hard for you as a VP sales or CRO to stay in the company, right? It's what's going to end up. So
Yeah.
I'm always quite interested is how does C-level, what do they think, right? In the end, the average tenure is 14 months of a VP sales, and I think sometimes it's not their fault. What's your take?
I mean, there's so much to unpack there. I think the first thing that you brought up is ultimately how I internalize it is like missetting expectations for the board, right? And it kind of blows my mind. I think if you've ever been in a situation where you have overpromised and underdelivered, for me, I certainly have learned my lesson. It's not what I'm trying to sign up for to do again, for
Mm,
sure. And even as you speak with different board executives and VCs, one of the key things that they look for in organizations and in leaders is honesty, right? They want to trust in leadership. And when it's bad, they want to know it's bad and they want to know
mm,
why it's bad. And ultimately, so they can make informed decisions, right? It's not rocket science.
absolutely.
It really isn't. And so from that perspective, it's, I think, being comfortable in that, I think is super, super important. Right. And then from, you brought up kind of from a C-level executive, what does that really look like? I think at the end of the day, it's really, and I've had to learn this in my career as well, it's not all on you, good or bad. You know what I mean? I certainly have made a mistake. I remember when I was going from, a director to my first VP role, my first big boy job, I like to say, I knew that the organization was a mess, right?
Mm,
But, I kind of live by, the mantra of extreme ownership, right? I run all the revenue organization, and so I'll figure it out, right? I'll lead and I'll make this happen. And boy, that is not how life works. That's not how companies really work, right? If the product is not mature enough, if the product isn't able to adapt with your market, if marketing isn't aligned, if pipe generation isn't aligned, all these things, there truly are things that are out of your direct control, and it really takes all of us, right? Solutions engineers need to get involved, and how are they performing? What does the security measures of your organization look like, and are those blockers for deals? So I think the cool part about being a revenue leader is that you get to touch all of these different parts of the business, but it truly takes the entire business. It's not just sales. It's not just one department.
absolutely. I truly believe in this. I believe in extreme ownership,
Yep.
but I believe truly in alignment, right? And if you start not, let's say, not being honest about your numbers, it's going to be extremely hard, right? To really align and to really fix it. Yeah. Because some people don't see the urgency on fixing things if it doesn't work out. So I really like it. I remember one thing out of your post, which I really were interested is like you say, look, if you have moved, if you have slipped, if your deal has slipped more than twice,
Yeah.
you're hunting a ghost. Yeah. And I think this is something which is the essence quite often, which let's say the AEs need to realize sometimes. Look, you need to make your own plannings, and you need to value your own time, because hunting a ghost is wasting your time. So what is your daily habit as a leader with your team that helps them to better forecast or better work with the deals?
Yeah. So I think it's important to kind of preface that I've always been at startup, scale up sorts of organizations. And there certainly are organizations where this might not fit. But I start my day, I spend a good hour, hour and a half every morning, before kind of prime calling time, going into depth in deals, right?
Mm,
Real depth. AI has certainly helped streamline this approach and this whole kind of activity. But I'm not looking at deals from the spreadsheet, right? I'm looking to understand what is actually happening. What is the
mm,
reality of all of these deals, right? And so when you are going about forecasting without the nuances, that's where you start to get hurt, right? And so I at the top understand the nuances, and then I'm having my leaders, my salespeople, they're also then adding to that, right? And obviously that helps from, and I know we're going to talk a lot about forecasting, but it also helps a lot about just closing more deals, right? I think
100%. Yeah.
my job is ultimately to help my people see the things that they're not seeing, right? And so I leverage a lot of different, kind of tactics in order to get the information I need to get the baseline, but also, give me, essentially little flashlights throughout each part of the deal where I
Mm.
can uncover the ghosts, right? And uncover the cracks, and try to
No,
overcome them.
absolutely. No, I totally agree here. I believe, right, it's better you have structured the journey, and especially you have structured how is the expected behavior and the progression, and you know what you need to do. As better you can use data to control it. And I truly believe in go-to-market controlling. Right, for me, RevOps and the leaders, right, they look into it and they control what's happening on the deals, or what's if they not work into it. And through this sales excellence, you're not only feeding, let's say, by result the forecast, but you're feeding the deals, right? Because I sometimes I see organizations, they only talk about the forecast, and I'm always saying, look, the forecast is a result of good work. As better you have quality in your work, as better you follow our qualification criteria, as better you work into it, as easier is to forecast, because we just press the button, right? It's more or less there, and then we can better help the team. Let's talk about a little bit and how we can help maybe some other leaders, because what I quite often see in many teams, that activity going to get celebrated, right? High numbers get celebrated. Big pipeline coverage gets celebrated. How can sales leaders shift their teams or the entire organization better in both direction, right? Educating the C level, but helping the team as well, saying, look, how can we get into a motion where quantity counts? Yeah. What is your approach there to really transform such organization when you get in and they're quite unstructured?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not rocket science, at least in my mind, right?
Mm,
I think quantity next to revenue is the approach, right? It doesn't matter if you're working 50 deals if those 50 deals don't give you 3x pipeline coverage, just in general. And so when you start, going lower in your funnel from a forecasting perspective, it's how many deals do we have that are making up that number?
mm,
You know what I'm saying?
absolutely.
And so
Yeah.
where's the backfill for that? And so I think it's, really kind of putting not just the amount of deals, but what is the revenue associated with them, and also where is the backfill for those. I think
Mm,
that's really kind of how I like to think about it, because as you get further down the funnel, that has to be, your confidence level has to go up and up and up. The larger deals that you have typically means the lesser deals that you have, but also means the more importance in having the backfill period, right? Because certain things can happen that are going to be outside of your control. And so
absolutely.
that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I always think, look, if you operate structured and you follow what we want to define or what we have defined, we can see the movement, right? The confidence level or the probability to close goes further up. But then for the forecast call, we or the number we actually commit, we think in backups, right? Because
Right.
what I quite often
Yeah.
see in this forecast call, they go deal by deal, and I was always like, look, that's what you guys doing. Let's talk about the slippy deals where I can support, and let's talk about if these two not coming, do we have two others to back up, or maybe five others which are a little bit smaller to back up? I think
Yeah.
that's absolutely the right approach to be on the safe side.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think something about what you just mentioned, as far as just kind of like, is your organization internally aligned? Is that
mm,
a pipeline breakdown meeting or is that a forecast call? Right? I think
yeah,
too oftentimes
fair.
like organizations and folks that you'll speak with, it's kind of a hybrid of both when it probably just needs to be more defined. There's a ton of
Yeah.
value in getting multiple stakeholders in a room and poking holes in deals. Ton of value in it, right? But is that when you're talking about, hey, this is the number that I'm going to get to, here's a high level about how we're going to get there, because there's a lot of different shapes and flavors, right? When
Mm,
I go through, obviously I report directly to the CEO, and that's how we talk about it. And in those scenarios, I'm talking about, hey, this is the number, and this is all of the reasons why it wouldn't happen, right? So we can kind of game plan a little bit, but it's
fair.
more of, we talk about the number for 2 seconds, and then we're actually talking about, what's the risk? How does this not happen? That sort of thing. So then he can go and
Yeah,
present that to the board.
absolutely. And I think talking about the risk, right, and speaking about it and speaking it early enables you as a lead, enables your CEO to react still, right? Not when it's too late.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite often what the people forget, right?
I find it really hard to believe. I think I am certainly more of like a pessimistic person in general, especially when it comes to sales.
Mm,
Just because, you get burned, right? You lose more than you win, for sure, right? So, and it's always on to the next thing. Even if a deal closes, it's on to the next one, right? It's almost
mm,
relief than it is, joy. And, to that end, I see a lot of folks, and I also believe in positivity, right? I have a positive outlook that this deal is going to come in. But that really oftentimes, I think, from at least from my perspective, how I internalize it, that leads more to happy years than it does identifying risks of why the deal won't come in, right? And so I think when you get happy years and you're going, hey, I'm really confident in my forecast, all these deals are going to come in. I have, positive vibes towards them. Again, there's power in positivity. Now, I don't want to undermine that. Does that relate into sales forecasting? Does that relate in winning sales deals? I've been burned too many times to have any sort of
yeah, fair enough.
optimism at all,
And you don't
right?
want to run behind.
Yeah,
I like
exactly.
that, right? If you constantly run behind and you overpromise and you somehow struggled at the end of quite often you see the struggle at the last 4 days of the quarter, and I was like, why? Why do we have this last 4 days? Why not work every day like this? And that's truly totally true because you really get burned. I think I really like that it makes your own life happier, even so it doesn't. And I think it's a right approach to be not overly optimistic, right? Obviously, you need to believe
Right.
in it, and but reporting over optimistic numbers, I don't see that. I think 2 out of 10, it really helps you,
Yeah.
most probably. Yeah. Let's talk about a little bit about deals failing, yeah. And I think when you look at it in detail, what is for you? What are warning signals that maybe we can share with the audience what they should look at, and to see that there's a real signal that this deal is at risk.
Yeah. So I think I'll preface this by every single organization is different. Every sales process is different. Market dynamics are different. So I'll speak from kind of, my own experience, but I think what I'd like folks to take away is how do you make this your own?
Mm,
But ultimately, really analyze every data point that you can get your hands on, not just of the losses, but of the wins, right?
mm,
I think oftentimes it's really easy to just focus on like, hey, why did we lose? And why did we lose to this competitor? Or, and that sort of thing. All valuable for sure, right? We just talked about, not being optimistic. Naturally, that kind of leans more towards looking at losses and really making sure you're maximizing the learnings from them. But oftentimes I'll see organizations, and I certainly have become, a victim of this before. We're not focusing on the wins. Why do people pick us, right? What are the key factors that allow us to win? And so, one, I think it's really like taking a fine tooth comb, understanding what data points that you need to analyze that can then give you the consistency in your own forecasting formula, right? And if, oftentimes I think a lot of those things won't be something groundbreaking, right? I think as you grow in your career, you realize that there's really no secret sauce. Nobody is like this super expert
Mm,
that has come up with something groundbreaking. It's really just kind of hard work and looking at the realities of things. But ultimately, how are we stacking up against competition? How many days are in? Have we been in this certain stage comparatively? How many personas? What are the personas that we have involved in deals? Ultimately, what is in? And this is where I think being in like the nuance of understanding your deals at their core, where this really comes into play, right? When we land our main differentiators, what is the response, right? When
mm,
we are explaining how something is different compared to their current environment, how are they perceiving that, right? You can have five of the C-level perfect personas in a meeting when you typically have a high win rate when three of them are in a meeting, but if they're not responding well to your main anchors, then that data point isn't as valuable as it could be, right? And so
sure.
I think those little micro moments, it's like identify, I've always been in SaaS. So, in our demos, in, whatever kind of the purpose of that meeting is, I know there's inflection points essentially where that's really where the juice is being squeezed, right? So how are those moments actually coming out? What's the tonality of the responses, engagement, during meetings, but also off call? Are we
Sure.
multi-threaded, right? Things of that nature. So again, it's not going to be anything I think really groundbreaking other than, really understanding what's
The
happening in the
details.
moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's all about growth in the end, right? It's not rocket science. I don't think either. I think it's all about the details. A lot of companies or people as well, they just rush over it, more or less everything. Obviously, it needs to be fast, quick, quick, quick. And then, but it's all about details and it comes back to our topic, right? All about quality in the end. And I think that what you just said, right? The nuances, understanding the details, listening or watching the details as well, can make a big difference. Super interesting. What's your point on data-based forecasting versus human insights from sales calls? How do you balance both?
I take this approach. Like the data is going to feed the human, and I'm the human, right? And I'm going to ultimately make the final call about what gets presented, right? But I
Mm,
think there's a lot of different flavors of this. And I think this is also where I think forecasts can fail. I'm not the type of leader that has their salespeople, their mid-level kind of leaders put together their forecasts, and I'm just copying, pasting all of what they're presenting, and that's what I'm using, right? Do I want my people thinking about how they're going to hit their number strategically? For sure. What deals are you going to, get in to get there? What are you doing if that's not there? What are your backfills? I want all the same things that I am thinking about. I want you to think about it, but I'm making the forecast. I'm just using your
fair enough.
input naturally as a way of breaking that down, right? And breaking that down at scale. And
Yeah.
so, and that applies to the data, but it also applies to the humans that are on your team as well. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, that's good because I believe, right, data can show you a lot of things, right? On the one side, you wanted the control on the operational people, but I don't want all the control with them, right? Because let's say, I don't know, if I'm hunting a ghost or not, the data can more or less tell me. If my conversion rate drops after 200 days and there is an opportunity with 350 in, they can tell me as much if they want how good the next call is going to be. This thing is dead because there's a 1% conversion, right? But on the other side, obviously they should put their opinion in. But, and for me, it comes with a big but, right? If I had a good morning, the sun is shining and I rode with my bike to the work and I had a nice whatever looking at me said hi, the deal is going to have a higher probability than if I had a bad morning. And quite often the companies only look at what the salesperson has put in as a probability to close. And this is what I don't believe in. Yeah. It's like they can put it in and maybe it makes them feel good and they can suggest their deals, which is good. But from the general numbers, I rather focus them on following the process than putting my forecast numbers in. So I, I,
Yeah,
li-
the
I like
and
your
I
approach.
I have just it's just something to add to that where it's I also think about this through the lens of motivation, right? Like is it motivating to my salesperson for me to be bugging them about what their commits are, right?
Mm.
For me to be really harping into them about, hey, like, how are you going to hit your number versus helping them hit their number, right?
Fair.
And focusing on the things that ultimately will, I know, allow them to get there. And again, this is all just learned through experience where I've been in that position where you get pushed around and then I leave a one-on-one and I'm like, I have no positivity. I have no actual like benefit of what just
Yeah,
happened there.
absolutely.
You know what
No,
I
but
mean? Uh,
and no,
yeah,
I really love that because why that's what I meant before. Quite often, a lot of organizations they only talk about their forecast, right? They do it in every meeting. They speak about the commit, the forecast, and it's more or less on weekly basis instead of how can we close the deal? What needs to be done? What support do you need? So I really like that because running through or reading, getting a deal read out, which I can read by myself, is waste of time of both, right?
right.
Like, let's rather talk about okay, that deal. You speak with them. Should I help you? Should I go with you in the call, or maybe get you that support? And that brings value. And I think this brings as well you get closer to the organization because you like it, right? You like to work in because you get better in the deals instead of just reporting over reporting, which is I believe is quite boring. And I think for both sides, right? Because in how many meetings can you sit and somebody reads our numbers? I personally hate it.
Yeah. My take on the reporting in general is I'm leveraging it to see the things that are going to surprise me, right? Like I don't need to know what our win rate is against our competitors because I'm so in the weeds. I know which
Mm,
competitors are coming on. I know how we're doing against larger ones in the different segments. The data is going to be insightful for the folks that aren't on the ground, right? But I'm going to see that data. I'm going to go, yep, I already knew that, right? So what am I?
fair
What are we
enough.
doing? I want to understand the other stuff, right? I want to be surprised by something, and that's really how I try to leverage my reporting.
Yeah, cool. There are thousands of tools out there, right? How we can do forecasting. What's your take on that? What do you use more? The CRM? Do you use extra tools? What
Yeah,
helps you to better forecast, to
yeah,
better have a better
I'm not the
understanding?
best person to answer, about tools and forecasting because I take a lot more of a human element to it.
Mm,
Um, and so I'm not using a Clary, I'm not using even Gong's, forecasting. I certainly see that there's some value in that, but I'm not quite there yet, right? I'm taking the analysis that I have from the tools that are helping me collect the information and
hmm.
then I'm
Fair,
forecasting it. I'm not getting a tool that's going to say, hey, I think this is the forecast. I'm just not there yet personally.
fair enough. What do you think when you think a little bit ahead, right? With all the, I would say, all the very quick developments of the past 2 years of AI, how it's gonna be developing? How much gonna be the machine or the human machine or however you're going to call this help us to better understand what's happening.
So I think that there will be an arc. I think that there will be tools, there'll be AI that start really, making huge progress. And you've already started to see it, right?
Mm.
And I think there'll become a greater and greater trust in those tools, you know, proving themselves. You know what I mean? The accuracy of those tools actually, delivering value. And I also think that those tools will help kind of guide what decisions need to be made in order to, improve. Right? It's not just spitting out what we think the forecast is going to be. It's also what insights. But I think it's going to get over engineered, and there's going to be a kind of a comeback to reality where, think
Yeah,
about it from the microcosm of being a BDR, right? BDR was strictly manual kind of process, ground and pound. Then everybody starts leveraging AI. It's really valuable, right? And now what is actually winning the day to generate pipeline? It's events, super personalized, non AI driven notes, things of that
absolutely.
nature. And so I certainly see it being the same way in forecasting. But who knows, man?
Yeah. Fair
Robots are
enough.
smart too, for sure.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we'll see. But I would assume, that that'll probably be the arc.
If you can give one recommendation to another VP, SVP sales, to how to get more quality into their entire approach, what would it be?
I think it's how efficient can you become a force multiplier, right? So if I were to put some action into this, It's like, obviously I don't have time to listen to every single call, every single nuance. I don't have time to be on every single call. But the reality of it is every single one of those meetings really matters, right? And so, how can I get the information that I need in order to understand the baseline of what's going on, as well as to understand where are those potential risks that can come. And then I'm only looking at those items. And then I'm using that time to then be very strategic in maybe understanding more, or providing coaching, providing guidance, providing coverage. Even when I join calls, like, how am I going to actually provide value on those, specifically to where I think the pain point is in regards to, does
Mm,
this deal come in or not, right? I don't need a 30-minute debrief on that meeting before a meeting. I think the reality of it is like, how can you, and this is where AI is like completely changed the game, where I get to those points and I go, okay, there's going to be risk here, here, and here. And that took me 3 minutes to get to, versus a 10-minute conversation with the rep, or just reading my rep's notes. You know what I'm saying? And
mm,
so, from
sure.
that perspective, that would be the advice. And that's also where AI has really come into play. And it was actually um, it was a something that I heard from another sales leader, Kevin Dorsey, who really opened my mind to AI, just in through the thought process of, it's not just like, what things can I automate? It's, how can AI help the most impactful parts of my business, right? It's not
Mm,
just like, how can it make me more efficient? It's like, how can I make more money? How can I, what is my top line objective? How can it help me do that? And that's
absolutely.
kind of where it ended up kind of trickling down. And so that would be my advice. It really kind
Interesting.
of helped change my mindset and get me behind what's ultimately coming. So that would be my advice to others.
Mike, thank you very much for your time. Lovely conversation. I really took take something with me, learned a lot. Thanks for your time. I know you're very busy. So thank you very much.
Yeah, of course, of course. Thank you.